When the Guild was first formed in 1961, Ireland was a very, very different place to what it is today. Our population, the 1961 census showed at 2.9 million, was the lowest since the post-famine times. The media landscape was a very simple one. Just one radio station in all of Ireland called Radio Éireann at the time. RTE television was about to come on stream. And 11 years later, when I joined the Guild in 1972, when I took up my first job in RTE, the media landscape was exactly the same. One radio station. In fact, the Guild was almost 20 years old when the second radio station, 2FM, came on stream. It was almost 30 years old when national commercial radio and local radio was licensed. On the print media side, things were not as dramatically different as they are today. We had the Farmers Journal, of course, a very important publication at the time. We had the Farming Independent. We had the Farm Examiner. The Farmers Monthly was about to come on stream. Quite a number of magazines came and went, particularly during the heady period after EEC entry in the 1970s.
The foundation of the Irish Guild of Agricultural Journalists. Paddy O'Keefe, my editor at the Farmers Journal, was in France. Met a bunch of friends, other editors and like people who had already been personally involved in setting up their own national organisations of agricultural journalists. And they were in the process of setting up the International Federation. They asked Paddy would he be interested in getting Ireland into the international one, and Paddy said he'd have a look at it. He wasn't that interested really, but he said, look at it if you'll send someone over to show us the groundwork. And they had a great pleasure in sending over their president to talk to us. He arrived here, spoke to a few people about it, and we looked at each other and said, we really haven't the numbers to set up something worthwhile. And then someone had a bright idea. Why don't we hook up with Northern Ireland, bring them in on equal terms?
I once described my membership of the Guild of Agricultural Journalists as a form of apprenticeship, because it was in the Guild that I met people and learned about the industry that I would go on to work in. I recall the 1990s as being particularly vibrant in terms of farm politics and farm protests. You recall the GATT, the World Trade Organization, the McSharry reforms, the protests of farmers in the capital, in Dublin City, against what they felt was an erosion of their place in the supply chain. And right throughout the 90s, we had various ebbing and flowing of reforms. Franz Fischler came in as the Agriculture Commissioner. We had Joe Walsh as the Agriculture Minister, but every time and everywhere there was a fight by farmers to have their voices heard, and they did, around concerns about how policy was moving. In the 1990s, Ear to the Ground was born in 1993, and that marked, in my view, a turning point. Previously, there had been programmes throughout the 70s and 80s, but RTE had lost interest in farming until the 1990s. My first programme in 1993 talked about the setting up of the Environmental Protection Agency. And today, what is front and centre in agriculture but environment and sustainability?
One of the outstanding features of the Guild, it is truly an all-Ireland body. We are an all-Ireland Guild, and we've been developed on that basis, or set up on that basis from the get-go.
The people who founded this organisation, their foresight was amazing. Our legacy is that we take it on and pass it on to the next.
We can build on their vision.
It's a key time now at the Guild. We're 60 years old this year, and hopefully we last another 60. We are an All-Ireland Guild, and I'm delighted that the ties with the northern section are still as tight as when the Guild was founded 60 years ago in Dundalk. So I first got involved in the Guild 5 or 6 years ago when I was starting out in agricultural journalism, and again heard about the Guild through the Michael Dillon Lecture and the Biennial Awards. I was delighted to be elected chair 2 years ago of the southern section of the Guild.
I joined the Guild in 1977 as a relatively young man. I joined Irish Farmers Monthly in 1975, having come from the Irish press. So the Guild at that stage was a very small group of people made up of all the main media.
My encounter with the Guild started with a man called Larry Sheedy. He was a driving force behind the creation of the Ireland Guild. I had come to Dublin and joined McMahon Sheedy, and he encouraged me to become a member of the Guild and avail of the network it presented. Joining the Guild was the start of many firsts for me, not coming from an agricultural background. It was the first time I'd ever stood in a field of dairy cows, and I think it was Larry's way of a job induction and to see that I was up to it. It was also the first time I attended the ploughing championships, and I remember being in awe of the scale of it and just soaked up the atmosphere.
This year marks 25 years since I became a member of the Guild in Ireland. Over those 25 years, I've experienced the warmth of friendships and the professionalism within the membership of the Guild.
We've been lucky enough to have debates. We've been lucky enough, and Damien was instrumental in setting up the Michael Dillon lecture.
When I began my first tenure as chairman, I wanted to do something different, and I noticed that we were only having one kind of social event every couple of years, and that was the awards, which was a great night. And my first introduction to a lot of members of the Guild of Agricultural Journalists was the night of the award. I took over as chairman the year after, and I felt, God, have we the awards this year? And the story was, no, it's only every second year. And I said, why don't we do something, in the intervening years? I was in RTE at the time, and of course, the great man Michael Dillon was very much associated with the programmes that I was now working on as a new entry into RTE. And Michael, of course, was a founder member of the Guild, and I decided maybe we should have an event in his memory. And I spoke to David about it, and we decided to look at the possibility of running an event called the Michael Dillon Memorial Lecture. And through David, we had Ray McSharry, the ex-commissioner, and it would have been a decade after the McSharry reforms, and he hadn't done too many public speaking events.
So I was actually in my mid-20s when I first joined the Guild. I was pretty new in the agricultural media scene. And I remember one of the first events I went to was Mary Robinson speaking at the Michael Dillon lecture, and I remarked just how the Guild exposed you to such interesting speakers. And as I was a young journalist, it was great to build contacts, so when you were researching an article you could just pick up the phone and put a face to the name.
Well, it was at the Virginia Agricultural Show in the late 90s that I first met the late Joe Murray, and I remember him asking me if I was a member of the Guild of Agricultural Journalists, and I'd never heard of the organisation. And within 2 years, Joe would be my boss in RTE, and I would be a member of the Guild of Agricultural Journalists. And not only did joining the Guild opened the door for me to the world of agricultural journalism, but it also opened the door to the history of agriculture in Ireland for me.
The Guild has helped my professional career immensely. There are contacts that I've made through the Guild who have become colleagues. They were clients and they are still clients, and it's also been a great opportunity to collaborate with other communications professionals. And I think that is the real benefit of the Guild, to have that strength of an association where you can have that collaboration.
It was a great honour and privilege for me to accept the presidency of the Guild of Agricultural Journalists of Ireland, and doubly so given that this is our 60th anniversary year. We're an organisation with a tremendous history, tremendous heritage, but I believe equally that we can look forward to a very positive future.
When I became chair of the Guild in 2017, I was part of the first all-female executive committee. So that meant that the chair, the secretary and the treasurer were all women. And now Amy Ford is our fourth female chair in a row. And that is important when you look at the situation overall. When we celebrated our 50th year of the Guild, we had had 2 female chairs up to that point. Now, as we celebrate our 60th year, we've had 6 female chairs, 4 in 1 decade. This is significant because traditionally the agricultural media has been quite male dominated, but the presence of women, both as chairs and on the committee of the Guild, is indicative of more gender equality in the industry overall.
The Irish Guild was making steady progress through the 1960s, and communications in general was given a great boost by the launch of RTE. Justin Keating was producing 2 very good programmes, and he fought for prime time, and I underline prime time, for agriculture on television. And he won his battle. And it brought farming out of the back pages of the paper, or their own little corner for farming, onto the front pages of the national and provincial newspapers.
It was a vastly different scene to what it is today. Reporters at that time, particularly print reporters, they had to find a telephone booth somewhere and filed or phoned their story in to a copy taker. There was no such thing as fax, there was no such thing as email. You sent your press release. If you were in Dublin, you sent it to the national newspapers by hand. Normally somebody in the office was sent on a bus to deliver the press release. To local papers, you posted it, hoped it might get there the next day or certainly within the next 48 hours. And of course that has changed absolutely dramatically since. Now Twitter leads the news. Very few journalists today can ever claim to break an exclusive story in print media. If they do, it's almost an aberration. In fact, the internet has changed everything.
I suppose the key things that have been there throughout my time so far as chair and as a member, obviously Brexit, climate change is the big thing that's coming down the tracks, and there's a lot of responsibility on all of our shoulders in the Guild as agricultural journalists and communicators to ensure that the message gets out there from all sides that are part of the debate.
The Guild in Ireland has also been obviously very important for bringing out the news of what's happening in the agricultural field. It also became a trusted body, if you like, for the readerships, for all those journals and newspapers and radio programmes. This became very evident during the foot and mouth disease and the BSE crisis, when a lot of the daily newspapers became very sensational about what was happening, but most people sort of went to find out the truth, which was within the pages of the agricultural press.
Throughout the noughties, I was very much involved in the committee, in the Southern Committee of the Guild, and I served as chairman on 2 occasions. Very exciting times for journalism. There were a lot of food scandals during that time. There was the foot and mouth crisis, there was the second BSE outbreak here in the mid-noughties, and there was the pork dioxin scare. And I also was lucky enough to be chairman in the late noughties when the ENAJ, the European Network of Agricultural Journalists, was established. And I'm proud to say that me as chairman, representing the Guild of Agricultural Journalists of Ireland, we're one of the founder members of the ENAJ, which celebrates its 10th anniversary as the Guild celebrates its 60th.
I've been a Guild member for 30 years. At a personal level, it's been an organisation that has given me total satisfaction in many ways, and just one thought comes into my head: the opportunity to travel. I don't think I would have gotten the opportunity to travel that I was secured from the Guild had I been involved in any other walk of life.
I definitely agree with you, and when you go to a World Congress or International Congress anywhere, you're not seeing what a tourist sees, you're seeing everything behind the scenes, you're meeting the real people. I remember a really fantastic Congress in Japan, which was the first time they'd been to Asia. And we sat around a table in a village hall with farmers who produced all the food on the table. And that was something that you would never get as a tourist. And that's why we have such a strong Guild in Ireland, that a lot of those young people have come back with great experiences and have put a lot back into their own Guild again.
You know, professional development now is the key thing for the IFAJ. Training and offering opportunities to young people to travel. You know, and the Irish Guild has played a huge role in that development, particularly in the last 30 years. And a lot of young people, particularly young chairs like Mairead McGuinness, Damien O'Reilly, Pat O'Keefe, etc., all benefited from the travel bursaries that IFAJ offered.
Paddy O'Keefe, my editor at the Farmers Journal, was one of the people, the distinguished few, who believed that time and money spent on genuine research and putting together a good circle of friends and connections was time and money well spent. Of course, that wasn't what everyone thought, as I would learn from the poet Patrick Kavanagh. He was then a very popular and regular correspondent for the Farmers' Journal, and I was the one who took in his copy and signed his little payment chit. On one of his visits, he said to me, "Is himself within?" And he was obviously referring to the editor's office and the editor's room, and the possibility of a bit of a haggle with the editor for more money. He was obviously very disappointed when he heard the answer. The editor's not in, he's in Finland, looking at a new way of making very good silage. Paddy turned to the door to go out, and he looked back at me and said, "That fellow never has his arse out of an aeroplane. Does he do any work at all?" Now, travel was still a very important thing, and it played a big role in the Guild's progress. We hosted two international congresses here, and we also sent a lot of our own people overseas in groups to pick up the same valued information.
I was able to go to an international press tour as a Guild member to Expo Milano, where the theme was Feeding the Planet, and that continued on the following year to an ENAJ press trip to Emilia-Romagna, and that was a fantastic opportunity to see behind the scenes.
I was very fortunate to be able to attend several congresses throughout Europe, the USA and Japan. The great thing about these events are that they encourage young journalists to take part by offering bursaries, and Ireland has always punched way above its weight in terms of selection of young people going forward and succeeding in being selected for leadership programmes.
Being a young member of the Guild also gave me the opportunity to apply for the Young Leaders Award with the IFAJ, and also many of my colleagues, I encouraged them to do it over time. So with the Guild, I've travelled to Sweden, the United States. I've had colleagues that have gone to dairy farms in New Zealand, beef farms in Brazil, and wind farms in the Netherlands. And these are opportunities that we just wouldn't have had if we weren't members of the Guild.
What's encouraging is the amount of young people joining the Guild. That's the first thing, because with respect to Damien, 20 years ago, he was a young man joining the Guild, and there weren't many young people sitting around the committee table. Happily today, there's lots of younger people engaged. People from Agriland, people from the Farmers' Journal, people from the Independent, IFP Media, etc., RTE, have all embraced and got involved in the Guild. We have to remain relevant to our core audience.
Having been through the year of COVID, we've seen the benefit of technology in communications, where the whole nation was online, and we were able to utilise digital communications. I think that will definitely only continue to grow, but I think it'll never replace fully face-to-face and traditional methods of communication as well. But one of the things that I saw during COVID was when you are faced with a challenge, you can flex and innovate and have online events and online awards, and actually you end up reaching a bigger audience as a result of it.
I think technology has a great role to play within agriculture and within the media over the next 10 to 20 years. I mean, looking back on my lifetime, the changes that I have seen. I mean, when I first came into the workplace environment, an electric typewriter was the cutting edge piece of technology that only one person in the office would have access to. Then we went from fax to email, and I don't know what comes next.
We've spoken earlier about how agriculture was mainstream in the 60s, 70s, 80s, then it kind of went into a niche on itself, and it's come back mainstream again, and I think that's where it belongs as well. And the next 60 years are looking very positive.
So the 1990s was a formative period for farming, and in many ways set the scene for what we're dealing with now today. An agricultural industry that is going through an evolution, I hope not a revolution, an industry that needs to reform and be more sustainable. But perhaps the communication, the need for agricultural journalism is greater than ever to allow farmers understand what's being asked of them and to allow them be part of the solution towards sustainability rather than the current mood, which I fear they feel they're part of the problem. But I know that good agricultural journalism will change that, and certainly being part of the Guild changed my life.
People talk about the challenges that confront Irish agriculture and global agriculture at the present time. They talk about Brexit, they talk about climate change. I truly don't recognise the term challenge, but I do see opportunity. And when this is all cut back to the very core challenge, the world's population is growing at an exponential rate, and farmers, not just in Ireland but around the world, will be challenged with the job of feeding all of those extra people. To make that happen will require a total buy-in from young people. I truly recognise that as the core challenge facing Irish agriculture today, and that will interface across all aspects of farming and food in this country. But the good news from the point of view of the Guild is that we have a very vibrant membership, a very young membership, and I look forward to the membership of the Guild growing accordingly over the years that follow.